But yeah, I want to start at kind of at the beginning. And like, as much as you're comfortable talking about it, I'm really interested to learn about your childhood and, where you grew up and, what those formative years were like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually still live in the same city that I grew up in. I was born in New York, but moved to Kentucky when I was like 2 months old or something. And so I've lived here the majority of my life. I've lived a couple of other places. I lived in California for a while, in Tennessee for a while, and then I came home to Kentucky. And I love this state. I'm happy here despite some of our politics.
Yeah.
I generally tend to apologize for the existence of Mitch McConnell whenever I run into
Yeah.
people from other states and other countries. I
Yeah.
never voted for him, but
But
in any case, but I do love it here. It's pretty country, and I'm a very cliche Kentucky girl. I am a bourbon drinker. I rode horses growing up.
yeah.
I have not in a long time, but I could definitely still throw my leg over it's kind of nice to feel like, in the apocalypse.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I could be I don't have a whole lot of apocalypse skills, but I could be the person who saddles up and rides the horse for help. I can do that. That is what
Totally.
I can offer. Very little else. So yeah, I grew up in Kentucky, and I just, I, I always sort of remember as far as like, liking the spooky stuff and liking the horror stuff. I know that like many horror fans, I read all kinds of things entirely too early.
Yeah.
My parents had, particularly my mother had these massive bookshelves, and just there were never any constraints placed on what we read, so I could just pull whatever off the shelf and start reading it. And often I feel like that's probably also how I've learned about a lot of things in life that normally you would ask your parents about.
Yeah.
And so it's always interesting later when you're like, oh, that was probably a really skewed view of things because it was from like a horror book perspective
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, and I
Yeah.
remember like the Thornbirds too, which I loved, was a fantastic. I don't know if you've read that.
No, I haven't,
Um,
but yeah, I know of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a massive tome, and I loved it. But I also I'm a very literal person. Especially as a kid, I was so literal,
Yeah.
and I had a really hard time with certain things. Like just, I mean, as a ridiculous example, the constant occurrence of the reference to baby in love songs. I always thought they were talking to literal infants, and I was like, this is inappropriate. Like, like I just don't feel like this is how we should be expressing ourselves to small children.
No.
Didn't never stop to ask these questions, so I just wandered around with these weird thought patterns and all that kind of stuff. But I just remember, like, in the Thornbirds, the main mother character is very jealous of her daughter,
Yeah.
and there's some sort of statement in there that basically like that there's a lot of purpose in a mother having a son, but the only purpose in having a daughter is someone to be jealous of or something. And so
Yeah.
I remember like saying that to my mom, like, yeah, well, I understand that this is the case. She's looking at me like, what the fuck? No, maybe next time you come across these things in books, maybe we could talk about it. And I'm like, yeah, probably not. But yeah,
So
so
did your parents, your mum have horror books around? Did
absolutely.
they liked reading horror? Your mum?
Yes, yeah, my mom especially. She is a voracious reader, and she
Yeah.
read a lot of mystery, crime sort of
Yeah.
things, but also just a ton of horror. And so yeah, I very much gravitated towards those, particularly after I always tell this little anecdote of like, because it's when I really remember like the first. I mean, I feel like I was always kind of into spooky stuff, but I
Yeah.
but I just sort of remember like being probably like 8 or 9, and we went to the library, and it was like fall, like coming on to like when school was starting back and everything. And I remember leaving the library at like dusk, and these leaves kind of swirling, and the
Yeah.
weather's kind of turning. And I remember thinking, ooh, when we get home, maybe we could put up Halloween decorations. And then I just sort of thought, wait a sec, I could do this all the time.
Yeah.
Like wait, I have control over this aesthetic.
Yeah.
And so just from then on, like it was always just like I know that I was a giant pain in the ass because it was like, all right, it's Laurel's turn to pick the movie. I'm like, horror. And they're like,
Yeah.
could you? I'm like, no, absolutely. I've been waiting to watch this movie. This is what we're watching.
But that's great. And would you describe your mother as a fairly normal person, or was she quite
God,
eccentric?
no.
No.
No, very no. No, she is also a writer, and
Ah,
she is of the significantly more eccentric variety than I am.
yeah.
Um, I actually sort of observed, the uncertainty because she
Yeah.
wrote full time, and I observed that, and I thought I want to be an accountant.
Yeah.
I don't want to live like this. This is terrible. Um, just because I'm again literal kid and very like plan ahead sort of thing. I
Yes.
love Excel spreadsheets. Like I have things planned ahead for years at a time. And so yeah, I was like I absolutely never want to do that. And
Yeah.
then when I was in college, finishing up my degree, I'm a paralegal, so that's what I went to school for, and so I was doing a lot of legal writing, which I actually really enjoy because I'm a giant nerd.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah. Yeah.
I I love the law. I love legal writing. And but then I started having words in my head that were more storytelling,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, damn it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was really trying not to be a writer, and then just kind of went down that road. But
Oh, it's actually really interesting. I've met a lot of writers who are paralegals, and
oh, really?
yeah, I think, and horror, well, the horror writers as well, at least three that I know of, and including you. But I think it's quite interesting because obviously legal writing is, I mean, it's a lot about the economy of words, isn't it? It's you're
Absolutely.
not being descriptive, or you are, but you're not, you're not, you're trying to keep it simple and truthful and all of that.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is obviously does really help with fiction writing as well. And
Absolutely.
I would,
Yeah.
because I would say your writing is, I mean, it's got a lot of impact, but it isn't overtly flowery, it. So I kind
Yeah.
of see how that could come through. So have you doing the legal work forever, basically?
For let's see, I've been at my job for like 12 and a half years.
Wow.
So yeah, I've been doing, and before that, I a horrible job that had some legal implication stuff to it, but it was much more wrangling things that couldn't possibly be wrangled.
Yeah.
But then yeah, when I got into and I do not. It's kind of funny because in paralegal school they're preparing you as though you're going to be the one writing these appellate court briefs.
Yeah.
I remember one of my first interviews. Was with I think like the attorney general's office or something, and I brought my writing sample of my appellate court brief I'd written, and the attorney's looking at it, he's like, "This is my job." Like, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I don't need to do that. I'm just saying I'm capable of it." And
Yeah.
I honestly think that leaned into me not getting that job, where he was like,
Who's coming to
"Rude,"
you? Yeah. Yeah. You'd be coming
um,
for their job eventually. That's what it was.
I no, because it's
No.
one of the things that like doing what I do now, and I am immensely lucky because I do genuinely love my job.
Yeah.
Um, I love I love what I do, and I love the people that I work with and for, and that is rare.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
very rare. But it's lovely because they value me
Yeah.
on multiple levels, and they love that I'm a writer. So they commonly will uh I usually do the red line proofing of the majority of like um not every legal document obviously, but like briefs and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Like it's like, okay, give it to Hightower, let's see what, and I just red pen the ever living hell out of it because and it's nice because they're lawyers, so they have thick skins on it. They're never like, "Oh, I can't believe you caught
No.
my darlings." They're like, "Yes, now it's in under the word count." So
Yeah.
it's really nice. They celebrate my writing. For the most part, they don't read it,
No,
which
no,
is
no.
best for everyone
Yeah.
involved. I feel like, um,
So,
but
so,
yeah,
so it's clearly important for you to enjoy the job that you're doing. And when you were growing up, kind of like as you before, like you through school and into college, like, did you have a good time with people? Did you feel like you fit in and all of
God,
that?
no, no,
No.
no, no, not at all. I had massive social anxiety without realizing that that's what it was. Like
Yeah.
I had never. I feel like when I was growing, because I'm 42. I feel like when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of like acknowledgement of that. It's
No,
just
no,
like
no.
if you had social anxiety, you were just a weirdo. It's
Yeah.
like, why aren't you talking to people? I'm like, I literally can't. Like,
Yeah.
I just can't. Like, I would like to not be a weirdo in the corner, but I don't know how to interact. So no, I was very, very odd. Not socialized at all.
No.
And that's something that took a number of years to sort of like and multiple levels, to get to the point where I was comfortable talking to people.
Yeah. How did you kind of work out that it was social anxiety?
I I actually think I might have been in my 30s or something, and I
Yeah.
started hearing the term.
Yeah.
Because but then, back then it was just like, oh well, you're shy, you're
Exactly.
whatever, and you'll get over it. But that does not encompass the deep-seated,
Mm,
those anxious symptoms, the churning of the stomach, the tightness of the chest,
mm,
that sort of thing, and the dread, the eternal dread of those situations when you know you're going to have to do them.
mm.
I was a theater kid,
Yeah.
and I had no problem being on stage. I would get apprehension,
Yeah.
jitters right before like opening night or something. But otherwise, I could step out on stage, and the second I opened my mouth, I was fine. I was in a totally different place.
Mm.
Which I feel, in retrospect, ties in some with the writing thing because when I'm in the groove, it's like that's where I am. I am not here. I am over here with my
Yes.
characters doing that sort of a thing.
Definitely, and I think that with social anxiety as well, if you misunderstand your anxiety, you often kind of take it out on yourself, and you kind of go,
Hmm.
"This is a me problem,"
Yes.
and that's you just spiraling like that. And I guess when going on stage, you get to step out of yourself as well, which is
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
which I think is probably true of a lot of creative people. Ultimately, is it's a very good way of escaping yourself. You go
Yes.
into those other worlds. But now it sounds like you've got quite a good balance because you're one half of you've got your writing, which is the legal stuff, which is you can't be out of yourself. You have to be present and focused. But
Yeah.
you still balance it with your fiction writing. When did you start then? Out was it? Did you say college? You started maybe feeling the pull of fiction writing.
Yeah, so that would have been, and it took me, I was they used to call it an older, wiser learner. It took me quite some time to get through college just because I was working full time and everything. So somewhere in my mid 20s,
Yeah.
I just had stories in my head that I wanted to just commit to paper. And I never had any intention of publishing. I just was like, okay, this is for me. But then it's like, you spend a certain amount of time on it. And also when you grow up in a writing household wherein,
Mm.
you don't, it's just an understanding that this is, and I will say it was interesting because I very much grew up with the idea that if you want to pursue a creative field, then you just do,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
you don't like, and I never felt like anyone owed me a living while I did so. So I was just like, fine, I'm going to do this, and I'm also going to work full time, and also I'm going to have the second job over here, and
Yeah.
probably I'm going to be in school, and you just kind of do it.
Totally.
Um, yeah.
No, I see that, and also it's because my family are writers, and I
Oh, that's
think
awesome.
yeah, it is great, and I think it's great because it kind of ties into what you just said that it's a very fortunate thing because you get to see that it's possible. And I think some people would go, I've got a full-time job. I've got personal issues. I don't have time to pursue something that might be shit and also no one will care about and it will never work and it's a dream that
Yeah.
will crumble. And so I think that just even being exposed to the possibility that yeah, you can do it. And yeah, maybe you don't have to be the most successful person ever, but you can have a job and you can still get fulfillment for it.
Yeah.
And so how long did you write before you decided to take it seriously?
Um, a number of years because it took me a long time. I mean, I wrote one book that was god awful, and is
It's a
I
rite
wouldn't
of
even call it a
passage.
yeah, I don't even
Yeah.
think it's a trunk novel. I think it's a trash novel. Like I will be very posthumously angry and come back and haunt anyone who decides to try to publish that, oh, this undiscovered novel of Laurel Hightowers. There's a reason. Leave it in the past where it belongs. Um, so,
Yeah.
I did that and then so I mean I think it took me 11 years to write Whispers in the Dark.
Yeah.
And a lot of that had to do with just like, I didn't know to do things like, I didn't outline, I didn't used to outline. And
Mm.
I didn't used to do like scene plans. I just wasn't very organized. And I didn't think about things like very practical matters. Like I love ghosts.
Yeah.
They're my favorite thing. And I try to put them in every book that I write because I
Yeah.
just love ghosts. I think they're wonderful.
Yeah.
But I didn't think about things like, for example, a legend that indicates within the realm of your story what is possible and why is it there.
Yeah.
Like, and you don't have to put it into the book itself, but you as the author have to
Mm.
know. Because I know at one point feedback I got for Whispers was like, there's just, and this was an early version, but it's like, there's just ghosts popping up everywhere and there doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason. I'm like, oh, excellent point.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's
Yeah.
one of those things like it was training wheels that I had to learn from. And I ended up being pretty happy with the final product on that.
Yeah.
It's definitely illustrative of where I was in my writing career at the time, which I hope I'm a lot better now, but I don't want to look back at things that I wrote, that long ago and trash talk them. They were what they
No,
were, and I poured my
process.
heart and soul into them. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. I mean, I'm pretty sure with anything, you've got to, like, well, I mean, my personal philosophy on things is you got to finish it. Finishing it
Hmm.
is the most important thing, really. And yeah, sometimes that might be really painful because you might not feel it's that good. But I think if you get into the habit of that, you were like, well, I'll do it again. I'll finish another thing and I'll finish it. And the process just makes you better no matter what. But I can totally understand that. And did you, with this, when did you start? When did you get published first, or what was your route into kind of that world?
So I unabashedly rode the nepotism train of I ended up sending my mother's agent at the time, when she mentioned that I had a book, he expressed interest in it. He's like, well, I want to read it. And so I did send it to him, and that is absolutely a privilege,
No, no, no.
but on the other hand, I'm also just sort of like, I really would have traded complete stability in childhood for that one agent shot sort of thing. So
Totally, totally.
yeah, so he sat on it for a year, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
And then he was like, okay, yes, yeah, this is great. I'll represent you. But then it was just sort of funny because then and it is this genre mashup. I think they marketed it finally as like a paranormal police procedural. Anything to not say horror.
Yeah. Sounds good
Um,
though.
well,
Like,
thank you.
yeah, yeah,
Thanks. It
yeah.
was it was fun, and it was very exciting to see it, out and about, and it's kind of funny because it's like the public meets your imaginary friends kind of thing. You're like,
Definitely.
"Oh yeah, Rose. That's great." She usually just lives up here. So it got published in 2018, December of 2018. And that was just a I just always remember it because it couldn't have happened when I had all these years where like
Mm,
nothing much was going on. 2018 was when I had my child.
yeah.
So he was born in January. My husband at the time was diagnosed with he's fine, but a pretty serious chronic illness that
Mm,
really sort of upset the balance of a whole lot of things and
yeah.
everything. And so all this is going on, and I'm trying to deal with everything, and then
Yeah.
it's like, oh, by the way, you're published. I'm like, that's great. What? So then I'm having like edits thrown at me, and
Yeah.
and you got to pick this cover, and you got to whatever. And so
Yeah.
I was so
No, that's a lot of uncertainty going on.
it is, and a lot of just insanity, a lot of like, I hear from people like celebrate every step, and I'm like, I would if I had the time,
Yeah.
but I don't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, it was published December 7th, 2018, and I would not have celebrated at all if my very sweet office mates had not taken it upon themselves to throw me a little surprise party for it, which was just
Oh,
absolutely
yeah.
so sweet of them.
Was this traditionally published? Would you describe it? Was an indie publishing house that
Small
did
small
small
press,
press?
yeah, small
Okay,
press,
fine.
yeah.
Was it important to you to get like the validation of an agent and seeing your book? Do you think that you in an alternate world could have just written and written and maybe that didn't happen and you'd still be happy, or was it important to you that it was going to be a real thing?
That's a great question. I think that probably I could have been happy just writing,
Hmm.
for me, because I've always been the sort of, and I think this is true of a lot of writers and just creatives in general. I've always been the sort of person who lived in my head a lot.
Yeah.
Had a very active fantasy life over here, but it's kind of funny because even in these like, the most far-flung fantasies, for me, everything still had to make sense.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
had to be like
Logic. Yeah.
motivation. Yeah,
Yeah.
I could never just be like, and then she rode the dragon into it's like, no, but where'd the dragon come from?
Yeah.
And I was always annoyed at myself. I'm like, can't you just fantasize like a normal person? No, it had to make sense for the plot.
Yeah.
So and I think maybe it was just a matter of growing up like that and knowing that it was a possibility.
Yeah.
And I used to be very, very private about my writing, and I never wanted anyone to read it at all. I was very protective of it.
Yeah.
But then when I did start having people read it and they enjoyed it, then you kind of like that little
Yeah.
dopamine hit.
Yeah. Yeah. Of
Um, and
course.
I don't know, like anymore now, a lot of it has, and I absolutely, if the market crumbled or if I, for whatever reason, stopped doing this, I would still write for myself and be perfectly happy,
Yeah.
I think. because there are elements of publishing that are just soul sucking.
Yeah.
And there have
Business.
been
Yeah.
times that if I was not committed to multiple deadlines, that I would just walk away from it. Not because anything horrible happened to me,
Mm.
but because I'm very tired. You
Yeah,
know,
no, of course. Of course,
I could really say,
and it is massively, it's about, I mean, yes, of course, deadlines and stuff, but it is about self-motivation as well. And I
yeah,
mean, I think if you've got a natural drive for imagination and that's a place where you are happy spending time, makes it a lot easier. But it's very difficult to write. I think always very impressed with people who write. And I guess like I guess what I'm wondering is kind of you had this kind of seems like your mum and trust me, I know this is kind of like chaotic, creative adult figure that is like not a lot of certainty,
yeah,
maybe around or stability doesn't mean there isn't love, but whatever, it's up and
exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But then you've got a very I would say a very good and well respected career. Like people in horror, people who know horror know who you are and think you're fantastic.
well,
And
thank
for
you.
but
Very
you've
nice.
also got you've got this very solid career alongside you, like where you're working.
Yeah.
So you still work full time and you still write regularly. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Yeah. I've had to adjust certain elements of things about, and anytime you have a kid, that
Of
plays a lot
course,
into
yeah.
it. You have to just there as soon as you get yourself into a routine, there's pivots completely. And so you just
Mm,
have to kind of be like, okay, this is when I'm going to write,
yeah.
this is when I'm going to make it happen. Um, and it's again, it's really nice for me in large part one of the things I enjoy about my job is the way that it gives me headspace to
Hmm.
do the creative stuff. The job that I had before for those couple of years was soul crushing. It
Yeah.
was exhausting. It was a
Mm,
necessary stepping stone to where I'm at, but I didn't write for 2 years because I had nothing left by the time I got home. I had nothing
yeah,
left.
yeah, yeah.
And with this job, it's part of why I'm glad I'm not an actual lawyer because I can, get to work, accomplish a whole lot of things, support a whole lot of attorneys, feel like I have really put something in there, had been challenged
Yeah.
and feel good, and then come home and I still have all kinds of headspace. I've got time for my son,
Yeah.
and then I can sit down and write for 30 minutes or something and get some words in, and that is a lucky place to be. It's a very lucky place to be.
So are you working on something right now?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
it, are you enjoying it, the process of writing it?
Yes, I'm getting back into, so I basically just gave myself a free pass for the beginning part of the year. I
Yeah.
had to finish a novella that was due. That's the one that's coming out with Shortwave in November. So I had to buckle down and finish that. And I think I got done like early February. And then where I knew I was moving, I was just like, let it be.
Yeah.
At that point I did not have the headspace. And
Yeah.
so I think I wrote like an essay that I owed, possibly a short story, but for the most part I was just like, I'm giving myself a free pass to not do this. So it's kind of like starting up a rusty chainsaw a little bit. And that's one thing I got asked at a book event recently. They asked us about writer's block, and I think everybody has a different perspective on that. And I don't think there is a wrong perspective because they're
Mm,
talking about personal experience. So
yeah.
you can't tell someone their personal experience is wrong,
No,
you know?
no.
But I have found that even if it feels as though there's nothing there, I'm a big workout freak, and I know just after all these years that like there are times that I'll start lifting and everything feels locked up. It feels like, oh,
Yeah.
I can't do this. But I just know that you have to just kind of work with it, let everything sort of the muscles lubricate, and it's absolutely
Definitely.
the same thing with writing. So,
Mm.
it was more a matter of like I appreciate past Laurel for outlining what I'm working on now. She
Yeah,
did a wonderful job. So I
yeah,
was like, oh, okay, this is the headspace. And yeah, like I just it's been since I moved the last like few
yeah,
weeks that
yeah.
I've been able to start back and really and it is a good feeling. It's an excellent feeling.
Do you think of yourself? I mean, like without not thinking about what other people think of you. Do you think of yourself as a good writer? When you're writing, do you go a lot of the time? Oh, this is good. This is working. Or do you have that kind of voice in the back of your head as well? That's
it's one of those things that's sort of back and forth. Like I've recognized that there's phases to it.
Yeah.
There's like, hell yeah, this is amazing. I'm the best. Like no, I don't think I'm ever like I am the best. It's more
No,
just like,
but
yeah, okay,
confidence.
this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
flowing. This
yeah,
is really doing a good job. And then there are times that it feels like pulling teeth, and I'm just like, if it's this hard, it can't possibly be good, which I don't actually think is true. I think that's
no,
just the voice in your head.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I just sort of go back and forth some on it. And the thing is though, like I don't I really love money as much as everyone else. I
yes,
think
it's
it's just
important.
delightful,
Yeah,
and yeah, and it is necessary to feel, safe in this world. And I don't have a lot of respect for people who try to act like that's not the case. I'm like, okay,
it's
you
true.
must be perfectly comfortable.
Yes, exactly.
Um, but it helps, I think, that I never really write with the idea in mind that I'm going to make money off of it. It's more just that, like, are these words going to connect with someone? Are they
Yeah,
going to make someone get in that headspace and either be entertained or feel seen?
yeah,
And so, yes, there are times, but like a lot of it just has to do with my own headspace. So I think where I was so wrangled up and busy
mm,
and stressed over the deadlines and everything like that, that the novella that I finished for shortwave, like I was like, I don't know if this is good or not. I can't, like I would be connected with the writing while I was doing it, but then when
mm,
I was done, I could barely remember what I'd done,
yeah,
sort of thing. So it really just goes back and forth on it. And I like to tell newer writers too that how you feel about it in the moment that you're working on it is not indicative of its actual worth.
no, no,
It's
no.
it's just what's going on in your head at the time.
Yeah, and I actually think that with a lot of creative stuff, but giving yourself a bit of space, it sounds like with this, you kind of
Hmm.
had that break, kind of allows you to come back at things and kind of see
Oh yeah.
what's strong and maybe what's and you got with all creative stuff, you do have to be honest with yourself. It's a really tiring thing. You've got to kind of go, it does that actually make sense? I know you want it to make sense. You're talking about the logic of the things.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
got to you've got to work it all out, and it does take time, and it is a process. Can you tell me what the name of this novella is that is coming out?
Yeah, it's called The Long Low Whistle.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
it's a cryptid book. I wrote a Mothman
Yeah.
novella below.
Hello.
So
Yeah.
this is my second cryptid, but it's part of the Killer VHS series through Shortwave, and so it's supposed to sort of be in the line of like the sort of VHS covers that you would find back
Love
in
it.
like the 80s and 90s kind of thing. So it's a little more campy, I guess, and more fun.
It's not
Hopefully.
bleak, so it's not bleak. Like some of your
Uh
other work. Like I mean, Crossroads, I would describe as pretty bleak.
oh, that's very bleak.
Yeah.
It's very bleak.
So this one's
Yeah,
a bit more fun.
it's supposed to be more fun, like, action oriented and
Yeah.
sort of thing in the moment. It's got a team of cryptid hunters and, this sort of thing. But it's me, so there's also, a little bit of grief in there. There's
Yeah.
and it's very it involves a coal mine accident.
Mm.
Which and so I live in Kentucky, so I'm
Yeah.
very familiar with that. And
Yeah.
my law firm does environmental law.
Mm.
When I started there, that's where I was an assistant, was in environmental law. So there's just some familiarity with those, aspects. And I just think a lot about, the families and,
Mm.
you know, how that sort of thing feels when you've lost somebody like that. So I've
Yeah.
tried very much to be respectful and also certainly, um, not utilize anything that actually happened.
Yeah. 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 No.
But just sort of including those elements because I got asked to write a novella for a 3 author project through Crystal Lake.
Yes.
And it was Appalachian horror was the theme that was chosen for us, and I realized how much I liked writing within. Hey, this is where I grew up.
Yeah.
This is where I live. These are the value systems and everything. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, totally. That's really cool. And I mean, I will talk a little bit because obviously you talked about grief there, and like Crossroads, a lot of grief, and I guess that kind
Oh
of
yeah.
the themes kind of run through your books. Because I assume, like with most creative things, there is a bit of therapy, or
Oh yeah.
you're kind of processing your own stuff, and obviously horror. one of the reasons why I love horror so much is I think it allows us to talk about things like grief, which are very painful for people. People often in life don't want to go around feeling and experiencing grief, experiencing pain and trauma,
Yeah.
but that can be also quite bad for you as well. And
Oh yeah.
especially something like grief is something, we all experience it, and but we don't talk about it, and it's weird how, when someone else is grieving, even though you might have been through it, it's also quite hard to understand maybe how they're going through it and what their associations are. But writing and exploring these kind of things is really helpful for people, because
Yeah.
it is that empathy, isn't there? So yeah, I would like you to talk about, just, you could talk about grief. I'd be really interested to hear what you think about that, and then just any other themes that you think kind of keep popping up through your writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an that's a good observation as far as like, even if you've been through something similar when someone
Mm.
else is experiencing it, there is a cultural discomfort with respect to grief in a lot
Mm.
of places. Certainly America is that way.
The West, I
Um,
think, in general,
yes,
probably. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's like we don't want to burden each other
No.
and we don't want to be burdened. For myself, I really started trying to explore because so often you don't know what to say to people.
No.
Um, and for myself, a lot of it was when I really started bearing down, because it's also very isolating though. If you're the one
Mm.
going through it and no one wants to talk about it, no one acknowledges it, you feel lost.
Mm.
You feel isolated. You feel just you do feel like a burden. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of times when people don't speak to you about it, it's not because they don't care, it's because they don't know what to say. And they're afraid that maybe you're having a good day and you don't want that grief dredged up. So ultimately, they end up saying nothing. And maybe sometimes that's the right thing, and maybe sometimes it isn't.
Mm.
I think sometimes too, when we think about, how to approach people, we might think of a time when we did approach someone with good intentions and it didn't go well
Yeah.
because they just reacted a certain way. But I think so much of that has to do with, I did realize one of the things I learned very early on as a child was to show up for people.
Mm.
And so I am an avid attender of funerals, not I don't just like find them and show up at them, but if someone I know, even if they're just like a work, colleague or something, if they lose someone, I will go. As uncomfortable as that sometimes feels, because it's a little bit of an apprehensive situation.
Mm.
But it's just a matter, in my instances, like to look up when you're in that greeting line or you're mourning or something, and
Mm.
you look up and see a familiar face. It's like the sun coming out on you.
Yeah.
It's this connection.
Totally.
And so that's the same sort of thing that I have been surprised with Crossroads, that I've had a number of people, because it's one that I actively warn people against. Um, uh, not that I tell no one to ever read it,
No.
but if I'm at like a mass book signing or convention or something, and people are asking like, well, which one of these should I read? And I'm like, look, be aware.
Mm.
This is going to be a major trigger for grief. If that's something that you're having a hard time with right now, don't do it. And I've actively talked a number of people out of doing it, and I'm glad, because they
Mm.
get this haunted look on their face, like, oh no, I don't want to do that. And I'm
Mm.
like, good. I'm glad we had this conversation. May
Yeah.
I suggest Mothman?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Because, you just want people to be able to experience it at the time that's right for them. But I have heard from a number of people that Crossroads actually really helped them process grief.
Yeah.
They had a major loss. And that somehow helped them. And that is more rewarding than anything else that you can get as a writer.
Yeah.
Um, I would rather have one person tell me that something that I wrote made them feel seen and helped them process
Yeah.
something than get 20 awards. That
Totally.
is just it's the epitome, it's the privilege of doing this.
Yeah.
And I do think too that writing about it and connecting with it through writing gives people the space, because when you think about, most of us have had a loss, varying levels
Yeah.
of size in our life, but
Mm.
you go through that strange process of all the official things you have to do, and
Mm.
setting up the funeral and attending the funeral and all these things. And you're barely even in your head at those times.
Yeah.
And it's not until after all that's over, maybe, that you start processing it. And by then, everyone thinks maybe you're done talking about it, or
Yes.
whatever. Whereas when you read about it, when you connect through a writing and reading level, there's no expiration date, and there's no time frame on when you do it.
No.
Maybe it really works for you to read it, but you can only read 2 pages at a time, and you spend as long as you need processing it. And I think there's a lot of value in that. Um,
Yeah, I completely agree. And I actually also think that when I find funerals very, they benefit me because I think that in my day-to-day life, I have obviously emotions, many emotions, but I think that I get a certain type of catharsis seeing other people in that state of grief. And I'm
yes.
not saying like I'm getting off on it. I'm just saying it helps me
Yeah,
in a similar
absolutely. It's a
way to
connection. Yeah.
exactly. And I think I relate that to reading as well, because I think that if I mean, whether it's how I've been raised or whatever it is, if there's some kind of thing of not being able to access or feeling like it's easy to
Mm.
access a certain type of thing, but you feel like it's important to access it, it's like, for example, maybe I don't cry that much. And I'm not saying that when I read a sad book that I'm crying, but I get that I can access that feeling. And
Absolutely.
so,
Yeah.
so and so but I respect that. And that's why, like you said, I think trigger warnings are a good thing. I don't think,
Same. Same.
it's, I think they're very important. And Crossroads as well is it's such a powerful exploration of grief as well, because it's really shows that kind of the self-affliction, like of like
Mm.
the isolation, like you were talking about, but also how she takes out on herself and her relationship with other people. So that's kind of linking back to what you're saying before. And it felt so raw. And you said before that when you were younger, you kind of learned to show up for people. Is that because you experienced great loss when you were young, or how did you kind of?
Yeah. I remember very clearly going to. I used to be the one that there's three of us. I have a brother and a sister. I'm in the
Mm,
middle, and for whatever reason, I was always the one that would go attend funerals
yeah.
with my. Usually, it would just be my mother attending, and she would take me with her. And um, I just remember like we attended a funeral for, I think it was the photographer who'd taken her headshots.
Mm,
And I remember thinking, what are we doing here? We shouldn't be here.
yeah.
Like we're not,
Yeah.
that's not a close enough relationship,
Mm,
and but I remember, standing in that long line. And then when we got to the front, how happy the
mm,
family was to see her. And that really stuck with me, not because it's like I want to go get accolades for going, but it's
mm,
that moment of like realizing that by showing up in that moment, and that's always been my experience with it. And then I lost my maternal grandmother when I was 11,
yeah.
and I was very, very close to her. She was an absolutely wonderful woman,
Mm,
and that was my first real big loss. And I
yeah.
remember, like, I remember being. And I am very aware that now when I attend funerals and there are much younger people, children or like teenagers or something who may not have processed it before. And I
No.
remember being so horrified at everyone because they're like laughing and visiting, and I'm like, you sick people, what are you doing, but at that age you
Yeah.
don't recognize that what it is, again, is people coming together and connecting over a loss like that. And
Yeah.
so yeah, but I remember very clearly that I was having a very hard time processing it, and
Mm,
my sister was too. And the youth pastor for our church, Gretchen, who's a wonderful woman, showed up and took us aside and actually talked to us, and that was such a wonderful, process of showing up for us.
yeah.
So yeah, like those sorts of things. And that's why, even though I am still a very awkward person.
Uh,
I
I
have
mean,
probably resolved, a lot of the social anxiety. I still am subject to it, but I sort of deal with it. But I
yeah.
am very awkward. But I always just know, like, it's better for me to go
Yeah.
and maybe be a little bit awkward than it is for me to not go, you know.
That's a very lovely thing. I think that's totally the right thing to do. But it's also a very fertile. It can be and should be a very fertile experience. I think attending funerals anyway. I mean,
Yeah,
it is
yeah.
it is just heightened emotion and introspection and all that stuff. Any other besides kind of grief? Are there any other themes that you think kind of pop up or seem to
Oh
recur
yeah.
through your work?
Predominantly, I would say it falls under the heading of feminist and feminine themes.
Yeah.
Um, Even when I was writing Below, which was supposed to just be this, creature feature chomp and
Yeah.
stomp,
Yeah.
I found that I was still writing feminist themes. The main character in that, Addie, is dealing with trying to find her feet again
Yeah.
after being in a very dependent sort of relationship. Um, and, I think that that's one of those things. Like, I'm sure there are people that maybe pick up my work and they're like, could she just stop with this? And the answer is no. There are plenty of other authors that you're welcome to go and read
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
that's not your thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, it's just like it's impossible for me not to include those elements in it because I'm never going to write something where the characters are not important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that means, by definition, that their experiences, the way
Mm.
they experience the world, is going to be important. That is how I write. Is I
Yeah.
try to get myself in that headspace and say, okay, this is the person, this is her or his life. How this is how it's going to affect how they interact and how they deal with certain situations, and that's so hugely relevant. And I am a woman, so I'm
Yeah.
writing from that perspective, and I am an unabashedly angry feminist, and I'll stop being angry when we get stuff sorted out.
Totally.
But until then, yeah, I'm hair's on fire a little bit, and I don't see any problem with that. I think there's hugely a place for it, and it's also a delightful sort of profiling thing for me. If somebody wants to snipe about my work being too feminist, that's cool, but I don't think we're going to hang out.
No.
You know.
No, 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 no. Well, you've got a son, and obviously
Mhm.
it's very important to raise children, I think with feminist ideals. Is that something
Absolutely.
that you kind of prioritize with him?
It definitely is, but it has also been very interesting to me. I did not, and again, I think the sort of exploration and public understanding of toxic masculinity is something that's
Yeah.
relatively recent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
We're
because
still also it's still being rejected as being like
that's
an
oh,
anti-men thing, you know what I mean?
completely,
Yeah, yeah.
completely, which is unfair because um, it breaks my heart.
Mm.
I having a son and seeing, and he's a sensitive little dude.
Yeah.
He is tough as nails. Like he will take like a hit. He will fall. He will do something that adults would be crying over, and he'll just sort of like shake himself off, but
Yeah.
never because I have never told him not to cry.
Yeah.
And I actually had a blow up with his daycare when he was little because I happened to hear them yelling at the 2-year-old boys not
Mm.
to cry.
Wow.
And when he
Yeah.
got more verbal, he spoke very early, but they're just sort of learning. And so like
Yeah.
after he was already out of that school and he started getting more verbal and discussing, he would tell me things about like, that he would like stand up and bump his head, and he's two, and they're like, boys don't cry, and also it's your own fault. And I'm like, oh, all
No,
right, I'm
no,
gonna make you
no.
cry, lady. You don't.
No.
And it killed me.
Mm.
And watching, my husband at the time would tell me certain things, and he felt like he had a good relationship with his parents, and I don't disagree,
Mm.
but given his age and the era and
Yeah.
everything, there was very much a boys don't cry. And that sounds, it's so reductive to even just put that phrase out there as though that could possibly encompass
No.
how harmful it is
Mm.
to an entire gender to just be
No.
like, no, you don't get to experience emotions. You're not allowed to. And then we wonder why there's so much anger.
Well,
It's
exactly.
it's unfair, like massively unfair
Mm.
and absolutely heartbreaking. And things like, my just how deeply it affects people, and to the point where they internalize it
Mm.
and act as, and some men will just be like, oh, no, I'm glad I was raised that way, it taught me to be tough. And then I
Yeah.
really want to hug them and be like, come here, it's okay, you
Yeah.
can still be tough. It's
Mm.
you're still very masculine. It's okay. But I mean, having a little baby boy and
Mm.
looking at his little chubby cheek face and thinking of someone telling him not to cry,
Mm.
uh, just oh no, it's so
Yeah.
harmful.
Well, feminism is really it's obviously just about freedom and equality. It's
Yeah,
about, and
absolutely.
it's for
Yeah.
men just as much as it is for women. I mean, obviously, it's balancing the power imbalance, trying to rebalance it. But I completely agree, and I think there is something very special about reading any form of book that has a subtext, or not even a subtext, just talking about things, discussing things, and normalizing things and giving people access. Because let's say you are in a family where there is a kind of patriarchal thing going on, or whatever it is, book can free you from that. Like you were saying, when you're younger, you read something, you maybe took it a bit literally, but it's also it's access to another way of thinking and experiencing the world, which
Absolutely.
which is so important.
It is. And in particular, that it's why like so I am a cishet white suburban soccer mom. I realize this, and so there were things that I wasn't as aware of when I
Yeah.
first sort of delved into indie horror and sort of the horror scene. And I credit
Mm.
very much Sina Paleo, um, Violet Castro, Angel Lewis Colon, R.J. Joseph, these authors of color who were talking about representation
Yeah.
and all that sort of thing. And I sort of perked up and was like, oh, good point.
Mm.
You should make an effort to read diversely. I've had pushback from people when I say that, say like, well, stop acting like it's a virtue. I'm like, I'm not telling you it's a virtue. I'm
No.
telling you that it is immensely beneficial as
Mm.
a reader on an entertainment level, but also on a human level,
Yeah.
because we know, and again, this is a phrase that I utilize a lot. So I apologize to anyone who's seen multiple of my podcasts and has to
Yeah.
hear me say this over and over again. But we know each other best through our stories, and in particular with horror, knowing what scares someone, whether or not it's something that scares you based on your experience.
Mm.
Um, when I read stories by Black mothers,
Yeah.
and they talk about, just as simple and basic as the experience of birth, and this
Mm.
idea that Black women don't experience pain, and
Yeah.
just reading some of these stories of how they're treated in one of the most vulnerable and excruciating
Mm.
times in your life, I just, that doesn't mean that I ever think that that means I know everything about it, but to have that connection and see what it
Mm.
means to someone in the same way that watching my son deal with some of these things and starting to really get an inkling about toxic masculinity,
Yeah.
um, and reading about other cultures' folklore and things like that. Like I am a happier reader. I
Mm.
am a hopefully better or at least more aware person. And I just think there's so much value in that, in these ways that we can connect with each other, because it's very easy to get on the internet and get sucked into vitriol and
Yeah.
get sucked into anger at one another, and
Mm.
looking at certain things and being like, the only reason they could possibly have done this is fill in the blank, my own reasoning for it that maybe has no bearing on it. Whereas when we read each other's stories and we read about what frightens people,
Mm.
Haley Piper is an incredible author. She's, and she's trans femme, and
Yeah.
uh, I'm a huge Haley Piper fangirl. And reading her short story collection, there's a story in there about using public restrooms as a
Yeah.
trans person,
Mm.
and the way that she was able to communicate. And that's such a basic human function. Everyone
Mm.
has to pee.
Yeah.
Like you just
Exactly.
have to.
Yeah.
And the idea that there's such turmoil and there's such risk involved with things like that is very eye-opening.
Yeah.
um, and then another film that I really loved, that I really wish that most men would watch,
Mm.
is Lucky. It stars Brea Grant, and oh my God, I'm blanking on the female director, Natasha Kermani, maybe it starts with a
Yeah.
K.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I spoke with some male friends of mine who had watched that and they really
Yeah.
didn't get it. And they were like, it's really boring. This isn't scary. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I get that from your perspective. I said, but I want you to think about this. Think about if that's genuinely, think about that really being the actual experience for 50% of the population. Think
Yeah.
about the fact that that's actually true, that is how we experience life. And one of my guy friends was like, oh, no, okay, no, that's a whole nother level. And I'm like, I appreciate,
Mm.
and I'm never going to blame someone for not liking it. I'm not going to
Mm.
say the fact that you didn't like this means you're a bad person
Yeah.
and not a feminist.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you can reach someone through that medium,
Mm.
there's a huge amount of merit to it.
There is. And I think that's why with horror, for me, it always comes back to, well, I mean, really anything actually, is empathy. And it's
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
in order to be a good feminist, and I mean, obviously, especially as we know with feminism, it is evolves. And you see that there are certain feminists who can't evolve.
yeah.
They would strongly say that they are feminists and they support women and they understand. But it's all of the developing kind of conversation and
Yes.
exploration. And it's just having to be able to engage that empathy and challenge yourself continually can be
Hmm.
difficult, even for women. But for men, I think it's because men feel like they're being called out,
Yeah,
is that's
yeah.
the I was going to ask before we move on to talk about like fear and stuff, is like there's quite a lot of male horror writers who write about women,
Hmm.
and some of them do it. I don't know. It's hard for me. I'm a man, so it's like I don't know if it's done well. I mean, it might be written well, it might be compelling. But what do you think about men writing women central characters?
I think that it's like anything. I think that sometimes we might think about why we're wanting to write through
Mm,
a woman's perspective is if it's because, and there are some men who have not only written from the female perspective beautifully, but tackled very feminine themes.
mm,
A big one that comes to mind is Chris Panettiere wrote The Redemption of Morgan Bright. And oh my God, it is so good.
mm,
He nailed it on every level,
mm,
and it's very, very feminist and feminine themes in there, and he just absolutely stuck it just
mm,
beautifully. And
mm,
there is a lot of that, and I think that that's great. And I also don't think that we should, people don't like to hear that they're like, well, I don't want to be told what I can and can't write, and that's
mm,
absolutely valid. But again, you can write it but maybe question why you want to do it from this. And
mm.
for a lot of male writers, it's because they're just like, well, because they're a person and I'm going to just write from a person's perspective. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
Like if you don't have to think about it in terms of like, oh, I must include women because I normally don't. Like, no, you're a person out in the world. You experience women. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with, utilizing that. But I would suggest to male authors who maybe want to write about a more feminine theme, let's say childbirth.
Mm.
Why?
Yeah.
What are you trying to accomplish by writing about this experience from the feminine perspective?
Mm.
Why? And that's not me saying I will never be the one to say don't write that. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but also think that if we avoid that, because you also hear people, and I do think it's very trumped up, very you'll see these ridiculous sort of TikTok videos where someone like pretends to be an agent that's rejecting them for like, well, you don't have any trans characters, so I'm not going to publish this. Well, but I'm not trans, I can't possibly. It's like that's disingenuous bullshit. That
Yeah.
conversation literally never
No, no,
happened.
no, no, no.
And that's that obnoxious pushback on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do just think again, like an empathy, like I am going to include characters of color, but I'm probably not going to write a story from the perspective of a Black mother with a son who has to worry about all of the
Mm.
extra things that come into play
Yes.
there, you know?
Definitely, definitely. And I sometimes think, because obviously with a genre like horror where there's the themes, you're often dealing with the kind of the harsher side of life. And
Absolutely.
obviously
Yep.
when you're talking about minority groups and or anyone who's experiencing hardship, and I mean even women as a minority group, I think sometimes men can want to write about women because they're victims in society, you
Yes.
know
Yeah.
and I think that there's sometimes it's not very sensitive to choose a character because it's interesting to pick a kind of a more vulnerable character and kind of put
Yeah.
them through
That's a good
hardship.
point.
And I sometimes can, with horror, I'm always switched on to like, what is the intention of writing this? And I don't know how much I presume you do, about extreme horror, which is a relatively new kind of an advance, of splatterpunk. This is just like
Yeah.
the next level, utterly depraved, like the
Yeah.
worst kinds of stuff. And I'm always, when I'm reading a man writing this kind of stuff where there's a lot of violence against women in it, even if it is a revenge story, ultimately. And by the way, this is not something that I'm not a huge reader of extreme horror, but I'm always thinking, well, why do you want to show women getting harmed? Like, what's I mean, is it just for the thrill of it? What is it? And I
Yeah.
think, like you said, if you're a writer should interrogate, especially in horror, I would say why. I think that's yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, again, I'm not one for censorship or anything like that, and
Mm,
but I think it's you know when you are keyed into those sorts of things, I wrote a short story that was written from the perspective of a cis woman,
mm,
but that dealt with trans themes, having a trans child. And I
yeah.
asked, I employed a sensitivity reader in it, and I was really glad because he was very kind. Like, you
Mm,
know, I never felt like I was being attacked for it, but he pointed out a number of biases that I was unaware of that I had. And I
mm,
thought, okay, this is probably not the time for me to write this. I need to shelve this and think about it. This is still something I want to say, but you know, and I know that there are a lot of people that roll their eyes at sensitivity readers. I think that one thing that's
oh,
important is to say, I'm never going to say that everyone has to. That's a choice that every writer makes. But what I constantly see in genres like extreme horror is someone puts out a book, they don't use a sensitivity reader, they like you mentioned, maybe utilize a marginalized type character for shock value or
mm,
for like a shorthand of vulnerability sort of
mm,
thing.
mm,
And then they're angry that the consistent reaction is like women will read it and say, this is gross.
yeah.
Like I don't enjoy this. And then they're angry as though their audience is required to enjoy it. And
Mm,
they're not. So it's
no.
a matter of like, you know, you put something out and you get that reaction. Do you think about it and say, huh, I wonder why I did do that?
Yeah.
Or do you just say, nope, that's the reaction I was looking for. I'm going to keep going. Okay, that's fine,
Yeah.
but you need to own it at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
you know, I don't know. For myself, I'm glad that I did utilize a sensitivity reader because for my goals, for how I
Mm,
want to interact, what I wanted to say had more to like was I certainly didn't want to cause harm,
no.
you know? And so I thought, okay, I feel like if I put this out now with my understanding of where it is at this point, that I'm more likely to cause harm than get across the idea that I want to put out there. So it's more just, I don't know, a lot of it just has to do with goals. Some people just want to entertain, and there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that. You know, I'm never going to be drawn into an online debate with anybody who, you know, wants to defend their right to just write whatever they want, no matter what harm they may cause. That's fine, you
Totally.
know.
And but I think as long as I think for anybody, any creative, but particularly writers, it is just know thyself kind of thing. And it's like
Absolutely.
obviously you take it very seriously and you know that what you write about is serious as well. So I think as long as you've got that and that's very admirable of you to have gone on. I'm going to leave that and leave that project. You know.
Well, I think it was more just that I really appreciated the perspective again because I, you know, it's kind of and that's why, you know, sensitivity readers should be paid as well, because I don't like
Mm.
the idea of putting a lot of emotional labor on marginalized communities and
No,
saying,
no.
explain to me why I can't. You know, no, like it's like you have this expertise, so I'm interested in hearing it, interested in utilizing it. You know, from that perspective as well. I really admire. So I don't know if you follow the Midnight Pals account.
No, I don't, but should I?
Oh God, it's
Yeah.
hysterical.
Okay.
Bitter Corella writes these great, you know, like short form interactions that are, you know, supposed to be from like, you know, the recurring characters like Stephen King, Dean Koontz,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Clive Barker, Edgar Allan Poe,
Yeah.
Lovecraft, and like different characters come in and out. You know, often contemporary. Like it's like I think I've been featured twice, and I was like totally giddy. I
Oh
was
my
like, oh my
God,
god,
yeah.
I've made it, I've been it. You know, but I noticed like there was a certain interaction that Bitter had where H.P. Lovecraft is a recurring character, and she had written him as having a stutter. And I once noticed someone reply in the comment thread and say, you know, I really enjoy these, but as someone who grew up with a stutter,
Yeah.
um, it's really, you know, it kind of hurts me to see them be. And Bitter just responded and said, hey, that's a really good perspective I hadn't previously considered. Thank you
Mm.
for saying something. I'll do better. And then she quit using that. It didn't have to be a big, I apologize to the world at large
No.
and I'm going to do better. It was just an in the moment correction and saying, oh, okay, good point. Thank you. And
Yeah.
I think that's how it can and should be done.
I agree. I totally agree. I think exactly. It's all development. It's all a learning process. It's the same reason why villains shouldn't have disabilities. Like remember there was that whole thing of
Oh, God.
like, someone you'd have a limp or this or that. I mean, and obviously it's fine for, all of these things can exist. Men can write women, and all of these things can be done. Just as if, yeah, I think just as there's a level of being switched on about why you're doing it, like you said. I want to ask you about there's a penultimate question about your fears and what, because obviously you've gravitated to horror throughout your writing. And what are you scared of? What are the things that make you kind of freak out?
Um, I feel like that's like a multi-layered question because there's some stuff that's a little bit more baseline, like I'm terrified of water.
Really?
I yeah, I mean not like the substance, like
You're not a
I
hydrophobe.
shower.
Yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah,
not a
yeah,
hydrophobe. I
yeah,
shower regularly.
yeah.
But I am afraid of what's in water. So any body of
Mm.
water that I can't see, the bottom of lakes, creeks, oceans, dear God, it's terrifying. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I like freeze up about it. And it's a genuine phobia in the sense that I don't act like a reasonable person at all when I'm put in a situation where I have to get in it.
yeah,
So that is sort of my like baseline like phobia. This is what this sort of thing scares me. But the other stuff, in particular, like Crossroads, in large part, I wrote because I have a wonderful stepson. And he, when he was a teenager, he did the sort of things that teenagers do to terrify their parents.
yeah.
And so it became a fear of mine that something would happen to him, you know, because that just becomes this immense fear,
Mm.
and with my son, once it's not like I needed to become a parent to develop that empathy, but there is an extra layer of terror that goes into it when you really know what you have to lose in that
Of
situation, when you're
course.
picturing what could happen. So a lot of it is loss in those sorts of situations. And then also just some of it, anymore as things have developed within our society and everything, a lot of it has to do with um, loss of control of certain things.
Yeah.
Like, there are things, and I don't want to go into the politics of it or anything, but there are things going on right now that I never would have believed I would see in my
No.
lifetime. And
Mm.
it's terrifying because you suddenly become reliant on other people who still have their rights intact,
Yeah.
to be able to assist in certain things. And that's a terrifying prospect because I am definitely that person who is not going to ask for help. I am going to be balancing, 30 things out and just be like, no, I'm fine, and in large part that has to do with like you have that control mechanism.
Mm.
And so that idea of like, certain things that are at risk, like when you picture like apocalyptic situations, things like that, there is such an extra added layer of fear when you know that you have a small person who depends on you.
Yeah.
Like because I'm a fitness freak. I'm also a food freak, which is why I'm not like super built or anything. But I will have enough nourishment to run from the zombies. Like I'll be good. But I have a certain amount of faith in my ability to take care of myself in a large number of situations. But when you factor
Yeah.
in, you have this small person who is dependent on you,
Yeah.
you recognize how many more layers there are to it.
I,
So that sort of thing.
no, of course. But am I right? Am I picking up the fact that you actually are kind of like do fantasize about these kind of apocalyptic situations?
Not in any sort of enjoyable way. It's more just like
You're not a prepper.
I'm
You're not a doomsday prepper.
no, I really should be prepping more, to be perfectly honest. There should be like small things that I'm doing, but a lot of it is just like, again, I mentioned earlier, like I've got a certain analytical mindset and this planning ahead sort of thing. Like I sort of like to think about and know, and like you watch like a zombie movie or you watch something like The Stand, and you
Yes.
think about how would I react in this situation? What would I be doing? And to know that suddenly I always used to say that in a zombie, or like major apocalyptic thing, I'd probably just give up real quick because I'm very
Mm.
tired.
Yeah.
So I just don't see wanting to run and, exert myself a long time with constant heightened fear to only eventually be eaten. Like I know that's the final, that's what's going to happen. So I might as well just go ahead and, get it over with. Let me go ahead and do this. But recognizing like it was such a goofy moment when I was pregnant, I was like, oh, but I
Yeah.
can't give up anymore.
No.
Dang it.
No.
Like I have to stay alive and do this.
No, no, I totally. But I think I think, yeah, I think loss and like you said, loss of control and all of these things, they are, well, also not only are they a product of an anxious mind as well,
Yeah.
which we all have. I mean, I'm like that as well. But I think it probably is also the reason why why you write as well, is because you're kind of creating these control situations as well, and
Yeah.
you can kind of feel out these kind of tricky situations and very difficult situations. It's, I mean, I certainly read horror for it to as a kind of survival
Absolutely. Yeah.
kick, to kind of go, what would I do? And so I appreciate any writer who kind of helps me get there. I'm going to ask you before we end what you're reading right now.
Ooh, okay, yeah. I'm always reading multiple books. So I am currently reading uh, The Essential Horror of Joe Lansdale.
Yeah,
Um, and that's excellent because I had read a little bit of his crime fiction, but not so much his horror. So these are some short stories that are really pretty dark and deep, and
yeah,
I'm really enjoying those. I just got done reading The Red Knot by Monique Asher that's coming
yes,
out soon.
yes,
That's excellent. Um, and I am reading a book of poetry called Blood Music. It's an older book, I think like 2013, written by Frank Reardon, and it's excellent. He's such a great poet.
yeah,
So yeah, and I'm not somebody who is a poet, like I don't think I couldn't write that way, but I'm always very like, I don't know, it's like I feel like there's something with good poetry,
yeah,
with people who write it with that openness of the heart that helps you to connect to things, and it's really, I love
yeah.
it.
No, it's magical, but
Yeah.
it's, you have to be good at it, otherwise it's unreadable, I find.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
much prefer a kind of straight down, I want to know what's going on, I want to understand what the writer's trying to tell me, but then also some flourishes here and there. But I
Yeah.
cannot be bothered anymore to wade through loads of like flowery language if it's not.
No, well, in that case, I think you would probably like this because
Yeah.
it's pretty dark and bloody. It's pretty,
Okay, good. Well,
yeah,
that's yeah, that's
he
a,
writes more like narrative type stuff. So there's obviously it's not like there's a lot of symbolism things. It's poetry, but it is
yeah.
narrative form and you really know what's going on and you really feel it. And a couple times I've had to be like, I don't like feeling these feelings. I'm going to set that aside for now.
Yeah. No, no. Well, that's great. I'll check out some of those. But yeah, thank you. We've come to the end. Thank you so much, like, for talking to
Absolutely.
me.
Thank you.